For my research project, I researched reading comprehension with students who have dyslexia. As a future teacher who's considering going into the special education field, I think that this is really important to know a lot about, considering that learning disabilities and dyslexia are extremely common disabilities, and I wanted to share with you the research that I have found on it. I don't know if any of you grew up reading the Percy Jackson series, but I personally was obsessed with those books when I was in middle school. They highlight characters who have dyslexia and ADHD, which the author did very purposefully so that readers with dyslexia and ADHD would feel represented in the books, and I think that that came from a really great place. However, the books did propagate a common misconception about dyslexia. In the books and also shown in the movies and on this slide here, dyslexia is described as letters on the page that are like moving around or switching places. And since this was my main source of knowledge about dyslexia, this is what I've imagined it as for several years, up until the semester. When I started doing a lot of research on dyslexia and working with the students in my field placement, I learned what dyslexia actually is. I don't Of course, as someone who does not have dyslexia, I can't tell you exactly what someone with dyslexia sees when they look at a word, but I think it's something actually much more like what you're seeing in this green picture here. When you look at the word dyslexia in the brain, it doesn't quite connect with what we think dyslexia should look like. It doesn't really make sense with us, even though if we stare at it for a long time, you can tell, oh, maybe that word is trying to say dyslexia, but it's not quite right. So dyslexia is a neurobiological learning disability which causes difficulty in reading. So when reading, students with dyslexia actually overuse the left and right frontal regions in their brains. Students with dyslexia struggle to master phonemic awareness, and that means that their brain has trouble connecting the written letters or words that they're seeing with the word's audible sound. And of course, this often results in a lack of reading comprehension. And with that said, I wanted to research how different instructional techniques benefit students with dyslexia. In particular, I was interested in whether students with dyslexia have better reading comprehension when they use guided notes or graphic organizers. One of the students from my field placement was happy to help me out with this project, and his name was Travis. So here's a little bit about him. Travis is 12 years old and he has a ton of cool hobbies. He is a competitive go-kart racer, which I did not even know that that was a thing. He helps his dad to train canines as like a family business, and he has the absolute most extensive Lego collection that I have ever seen in my life. Travis has dyslexia, so he was really relieved when he found out that I wasn't going to make him do a ton of extra reading after school. So here's how I set up the research. Since I wanted to focus on reading comprehension rather than reading ability, I met with Travis on 4 different days and I read the book to him each time. On 2 of the days, I gave him guided note sheets based off of the books that we read, and on the other 2 days, I set up graphic organizers for him to take notes on. I tried to choose book topics that he would be interested in, so we ended up reading books on racing, canines, Legos, and skyscrapers. Here is the first set of guided notes that we used, and these were based off the book about the Indianapolis 500 that we read. As a reminder, guided notes are when the majority of the notes have already been printed for the student, but the keywords are left blank, and the student has to listen for those keywords. And so Travis found these to be really helpful. As you can see, he has most of the blanks filled in, but you will notice that there are a couple that he missed, and we're going to go back and talk about that in just a second. So before Travis and I started reading through the book, I first went through the note sheet with him. So for example, I would say the Speedway was first built to blank cars. That way, after we went through the whole sheet, he knew generally what he was going to be listening for. And what he really found helpful about the guided notes was that all of the questions were in order. This way, when he was listening to me read, he knew what to listen for specifically. He was waiting for a particular sentence that would talk about the blank he was looking for next. But he also knew, since we'd gone over the entire thing at the beginning, that if he was hearing information that he remembered was a later blank and he wasn't there yet, he recognized that he had missed a blank and needed to go back and rethink to find the answer. And when he did realize that he had missed a blank, then he would stop me and we would talk about the problem. I would first let him think out loud about each one and prompt him with questions to see if possibly he really had comprehended the answer and had simply missed writing it down. And for some of the blanks that he missed, this was enough to help him enough so that he could figure it out and put the blank down. But for others, I did need to go back and reread certain paragraphs several times. For example, there was a question that was supposed to say, on Memorial Day weekend, May 30th, 1911, the first Indy 500 was held. And even though on our very first read through, Travis managed to get the May 30th, 1911, which was a blank, he couldn't get the blank that said Memorial Day weekend. And we read through that paragraph several times, and he really just struggled to get that word memorial. This is our first example of a graphic organizer. This is a spider web type of organizer. So in the center you have your topic, our police dogs, and then I gave him, branching off of that main topic, subtopics that he would fill in information about. Now, I had an initial hypothesis that Travis would prefer this instructional method, the graphic organizers, because there weren't so many words on the page for him to read through. However, because of that, it does require the student to be more independent in the actual note-taking process to create notes that will actually help them to study. Of course, it's still a helpful tool because it aids the students in grouping their information and it hints at the broad topics which they should take notes on, but you have to give a lot more than just the keywords for the student to understand what they're taking notes on. And unfortunately, because we were reading about canines, Travis already knew so much about canines from working with his dad that he already knew most of the information that was in the book we read, which resulted in him filling in parts of the organizer that the book hadn't even mentioned yet. So honestly, this was not the best assessment of reading comprehension, but he did enjoy the organizer as a note-taking strategy. This is the second set of guided notes that we used, and these notes were based off a book about the creation of the Lego brand. Out of the 4 books that we read, both Travis and I enjoyed this book the most and found it really interesting. As you can see, Travis has all of the blanks filled in on this guided note sheet. Now, this doesn't mean that Travis immediately filled in the correct answers for every single blank. Like the first time that we used the guided notes, we needed to discuss the book and reread over certain parts. But there was a tremendous difference in Travis's enthusiasm. The first time that we used the guided notes with the Indy 500 book, he would tell me that he missed one in a tone that clearly said that he was bored with the book. But with the Lego book, when he skipped a blank, he wanted to find out the answer and was excited to discuss the notes with me. And of course, this is not a principle which is unique to guided notes, but his level of interest in the topic strongly affected his level of concentration and effort. Here is the second round of graphic organizers. As you can see, Travis does have an answer in each box, but this reading session was certainly a step backwards compared to the one before with the Legos. Travis tries to convey his thoughts in as little written words as possible, which results in notes that would not be helpful if he was actually trying to study. In some of the boxes, he was supposed to have 2 answers, but he only wrote 1, and we did discuss the answers, but he wasn't interested enough in the topic or the organizer to finish filling it in. And also, in this section where I asked him to write the 3 tallest buildings in the world, he listed a few extra and incorrect answers. Travis clearly did want to fill something into each section, but he wasn't particularly concerned whether his answers were actually correct or thorough. He didn't seem to thrive with how open-ended the graphic organizer's note prompts were. Travis and I discussed his preferred note-taking method, and he said that he thinks the guided notes were easier for him to use and they kept him on track. And of course, there are outside factors which also affected this research. Travis's interest and energy level impacted the results. And if I were to continue researching this question, then I would do readings with several different students with dyslexia to see if this result is the same across the board. However, after 4 reading sessions with Travis, I have concluded that his learning comprehension is stronger using the guided notes than it is with the graphic organizers.